Hi guys, welcome to another video. Hope you're all keeping well. Now for this video I thought I would talk about the top 10 horror comics I used to buy avidly as a teenager back in the 1970s. Now before I start though guys, I should just like to point out that these titles are in no particular order. They are just my own unranked top 10 of which I have such fond memories and which still fill me with a great sense of happy nostalgia every time I think of them to this day, or see old copies of them on the internet or in comic book conventions and so on. Okay guys, without further ado, let's just get straight into it, and I'm going to start with number 1. Number 1, Eerie. This magazine, which was published by Warren Publishing, was a compilation of horror stories that featured a variety of characters and themes, all relating to the macabre. It was known for its gory and shocking content and was one of the most popular horror comics of the 1960s. Reminiscent of the old EC comics like Tales from the Crypt, with its sinister host, Cousin Eerie, introducing each story. Eerie eventually departed from the standalone anthology series and became dominated by serialized storylines, which in my opinion did ruin the format somewhat. Eerie ran from September 1965 to February 1983. Warren also published a sister magazine called Creepy, which nicely leads me into number 2. Number 2, Creepy. As I've just said, Creepy was the sister magazine to Eerie and was just as popular with horror fans as Creepy was. Hosted by Uncle Creepy, the format of this magazine was pretty much the same as its sister publication, regaling readers with all manner of chilling tales and terrifying characters. An anthology magazine, it was initially published quarterly but later went bi-monthly. Each issue's stories were introduced by the host character, Uncle Creepy. Creepy ran from late 1964 to February 1983. In July 2009, Dark Horse Comics, a new comic company LLC, released the new Creepy magazine. Number 3, Tomb of Dracula. Now we come to Marvel Comics' contribution to the horror genre, and to kick that category off, let me talk about the Dracula comics offered by the company. In 1972, Marvel started their Dracula series with Tomb of Dracula, which basically revived the Count for the modern age. This series chronicled the exploits of the vampire hunter Blade as he relentlessly stalked the shadows, seeking out the evil Dracula with a view to ending the vampire's reign of terror forever. Blade was also assisted by relatives of the original vampire hunters of the Stoker novel, e.g. the Van Helsing descendants. I especially loved the way Marvel presented their incarnation of Dracula here, a sinister, traditionally cloaked figure sporting a thin moustache and slightly pointed ears. And in a few particularly memorable crossover issues, they even had Dracula encountering both the Frankenstein monster and the werewolf, which was a great nod to the Universal monster bashes of the 1940s. In addition to his supernatural battles in this series, Marvel's Dracula often served as a supervillain to other characters in the Marvel Universe. Dracula Lives was an American black and white horror comics magazine published by Magazine Management, a corporate sibling of Marvel Comics. The series ran 13 issues and starred the Marvel version of the literary vampire Dracula. Marvel's Tomb of Dracula series ran from April 1972 to August 1979. Number 4, Werewolf by Night. A great nod to the Universal Wolfman movies, Werewolf by Night featured the main character of Jack Russell, who virtually mirrors Lon Chaney's Lawrence Talbot character in that he was cursed with lycanthropy, turning into a werewolf at every full moon. However, the notable difference in this comic reimagining of the Wolfman story was that, unlike in the Universal movies, the werewolf in this series often encountered all kinds of evil villains, just like the Incredible Hulk did, which posed an added problem to Russell alongside his werewolf curse. Werewolf by Night ran from June 1972 to March 1977. Number 5, The Monster of Frankenstein. As Frankenstein is my all-time favourite movie monster, you can imagine just how overjoyed I was when I first came across this magazine back in the mid-70s. Just like the aforementioned Werewolf and Dracula Marvel series, I was absolutely in my elements when I first started snatching up as many copies of this magazine as I could. Unfortunately, it was so hard to find the American colorized editions of this series, so I had to be content with following the adventures of the Mad Doctor and his immortal creation through the black and white pages of the British reprinted versions. Monster of Frankenstein eventually changed its title to The Frankenstein Monster, and it ran from January 1973 to September 1975. However, recently Marvel published a paperback collection of the complete series entitled Essential Monster of Frankenstein. Unfortunately, the reprints are in black and white only. Number 6, The House of Mystery. But Marvel Comics weren't the only superhero brand that was dipping its toes into the horror genre. We also had their main rival DC Comics jumping in on the act too, as they offered some brilliant little horror comics of their own. Now, one of those comics was one called The House of Mystery. Again, very reminiscent of the EC Comics tendency to feature a creepy character hosting each story. House of Mystery introduced us to Kane, a bearded and rather faunish looking individual who took great delight in telling us tales of ghosts, witches, monsters and other kinds of terrifying entities. Now again, just like all the other comics I have mentioned, House of Mystery usually delivered a twist at the end of each tale. The magazine ran from May 1968 to October 1983. Number 7, House of Secrets. Just like the Warren magazines I mentioned earlier, House of Mystery also had a sister publication, and that was House of Secrets, which was hosted by Kane's brother Abel. Notice the biblical references there. However, those biblical links were in name only, as these two characters were totally different from their biblical counterparts. Anyway, again, just like House of Mystery, House of Secrets had some fantastic tales of horror and suspense lurking within its pages. Now, I absolutely loved this. In this one, Abel was depicted as the physical opposite to his brothers, because Abel was short and heavy, whereas Kane was tall and thin. The House of Secrets ran from July 1971 to November 1978. Number 8, The Unexpected, renamed from Tales of Unease with 105. Now, I must admit, of all DC horror comics, this was the one I read the least. A contributory factor to this was probably the fact that for some reason this title always seemed to be pretty scarce on the comics rack of my local newsagents. The Unexpected offered a format consisting of the usual ghost schoolies and things that go bump in the night. The magazine ran from February to March 1968 to May 1982. Number 9, The Witching Hour. Now, this was a big favourite of mine, guys. In fact, I would even go as far as to say that of all the DC horror comics, The Witching Hour was probably my number one DC horror comic. Now, what I especially liked about it was the fact that, unlike House of Mystery and House of Secrets, this comic had 3 hosts instead of 1, and all 3 were women. Well, witches, to be more precise, hence the title. We had 2 ugly witches and 1 beautiful witch called Cynthia, who was definitely my favourite of the 3, for, well, obvious reasons. Each witch told their own story, which again usually ended with a clever plot twist. This is one comic that I would definitely like to see reissued, and it would be real cool if a TV producer picked this up one day for a horror TV series, as it would just be fantastic to see those memorable trio. Number 10, The House of Hammer. Finally, guys, we come to number 10 on my list, and what better way to end this video than with a horror comic book that, in my opinion, stands head and shoulders above all the others I have mentioned in this video. That comic is The House of Hammer. Wow, what a publication this was. Definitely the biggest highlight of my whole horror comic book collecting pursuit in the 1970s. The House of Hammer is just a dream come true for such a huge lifelong Hammer fan as myself. Right from when I first spotted that iconic yellow cover adorning the magazine rack of my local newsagents, showing Christopher Lee as Dracula engaged in a fight to the death with one of his adversaries, I was immediately hooked and from then on I bought every single issue, including all the Halls of Horror issues, which became its new title later on in the 70s. Devouring each new issue of the House of Hammer was akin to a kid devouring sweets in a candy shop. I mean, it's had everything a Hammer fan could possibly wish for, guys. From exclusive reviews of iconic Hammer films to brilliant comic book versions of Dracula, Frankenstein, etc. The House of Hammer was a British black and white comic featuring articles and comics related to Hammer's horror and sci-fi films too. Almost every issue of the magazine featured a comics adaptation of a Hammer film, together with an original comics backup story, such as the long-running feature Van Helsing's Terror Tales. The magazine changed its name several times. Starting in 1976, the first 18 issues were titled The House of Hammer. It then became Hammer's House of Horror for issues 19 to 20, and Hammer's Halls of Horror for issues 21 to 23. Now in 1978, the magazine went on hiatus for more than 3 years, returning in 1982 with issue 24, and the name Hammer was dropped from the title as it became simply Halls of Horror. The magazine ceased publication with issue 30, but is still fondly remembered by many Hammer horror fans to this day. Just like all the other titles I mentioned in this video, you can still find second-hand copies of the House of Hammer magazine and its spin-off titles available on various online stockers such as eBay and also at comic conventions.